Roy had been walking the mountain trail since early morning. His boots were worn and his pack was heavy, filled with tools that clinked softly with every step. He was a mechanic by trade, the kind of man who fixed things other people gave up on. Broken carts, seized mill gears, bent iron frames. Roy had repaired them all. He traveled from town to town, taking work where he could find it, sleeping under open skies when no roof was offered. The mountain trail was quiet that afternoon. The wind moved slow through the pine trees, and the sky above was a pale, clean blue. Roy liked days like this. No noise, no rush, just the sound of his own boots on packed dirt and the distant call of birds somewhere in the rocks above. He was thinking about nothing in particular when he heard it. It was a sharp, broken sound. Not a bird. Not the wind. It came from somewhere below the trail, down in the rocky ravine that dropped away on his left side. Roy stopped walking and listened. The sound came again. Then again. 3 separate voices, each one tangled with the others, each one full of pain and panic. Roy moved to the edge of the trail and looked down. The ravine was deep, lined with loose stone and old scrub brush. At the bottom, half hidden in shadow, he could see movement. Something was struggling. More than one something. He did not think too long about it. He just started climbing down. The slope was steep and the rocks shifted under his boots more than once. He grabbed at roots and jutting stones to steady himself, working his way down carefully until the ravine floor flattened out beneath him. The sound was much louder here, and now he could smell rust and old iron on the air. He pushed through a tangle of dry brush and stopped. 3 young drakes were caught in a mess of heavy iron chains. Roy had seen drakes before from a distance the way most people saw them. Quick shapes in the sky, or shadows moving through forest trees. But he had never been this close. These 3 were young, each one roughly the size of a large dog, with scales the color of dark stone and eyes that caught light like glass. Their wings were folded tight against their bodies, pinned there by the chains that looped and twisted around them in a rusted, ugly knot. The chains were old. Mining chains, by the look of them, the heavy kind used to haul loads up and down shafts. Someone had abandoned them here long ago, and the young drakes had blundered straight into them, one after another, each one trying to free the one before it and only making the tangle worse. They thrashed when they saw Roy. One of them let out a high, cracking sound and snapped at the air in his direction. Its teeth were small but sharp, and its eyes were wide with fear. Roy did not move fast. He did not raise his hands or make any sudden motion. He simply stood still and let them look at him. He spoke quietly. Not words that meant anything in particular, just a low, steady sound, the kind of tone he used when a frightened horse was blocking a stable door. Easy. Slow. Nothing to worry about. The snapping stopped. The thrashing slowed. 3 pairs of glass-bright eyes watched him with suspicion but no longer with full panic. Roy crouched down, opened his pack and took out his tools. He started with the outermost chain, the one looped around the first drake's left foreleg. The lock on it was rusted solid, so he reached for his chisel and a small iron mallet. He worked carefully, tapping at the corroded joint until it cracked and gave way. The first chain fell loose. The drake flinched at the sound but did not snap at him. He moved to the second length of chain. This one was wrapped twice around the same drake's wing joint, tight enough to have rubbed the scales raw underneath. Roy worked the links apart one by one, his fingers finding the weak points in the old iron the way they always did, the way his hands had learned over years of taking broken things apart. When the last link separated, the drake shook its wing free with a sharp, trembling motion and scrambled back against the ravine wall, watching Roy from a safer distance. 2 still tangled. Roy moved to them. The second drake was the most badly caught, chains crossing over its back and under its belly in a way that made no sense until Roy traced the lines carefully and found where it had all started. He worked that point first. It took longer. The iron was older here, deeper rusted, and once he had to switch tools entirely and use a short pry bar to force a link apart. The drake shuddered each time the chain shifted but held still, as if it had decided, somewhere in its small fierce mind, to trust the man with the tools. When it finally came free, it did not run immediately. It stood for a moment and looked at Roy directly with those bright, strange eyes. Then it moved away to join the first. The third was the easiest. 1 chain, 1 seized clasp. Roy had it open in under a minute. The last drake shook itself hard from nose to tail, ruffled its wings once and bolted into the brush without looking back. The other 2 followed a heartbeat later, and just like that the ravine was quiet again. Roy sat back on his heels and looked at the pile of broken chains around him. He packed his tools slowly, rolled his shoulders and began the climb back up to the trail. He did not look up at the cliffs above him. He did not see the vast, still shape watching from the high rocks. the ancient eyes that had not blinked once since he first climbed down into the ravine. The village appeared just as the sun touched the tops of the western peaks. It was a small place. Maybe 30 houses, a mill, a stable, and a wide dirt square in the middle where a few people were finishing up the last work of the day. Smoke rose from chimneys. A dog barked once and went quiet. The kind of village Roy had passed through 100 times before, the kind that asked no questions and expected nothing from a stranger except that he move along by morning. Roy walked in through the main path with his pack on his back and his tools rattling at his side. He was tired, his hands were cut from the ravine rocks, and he was hoping for a warm meal and a dry corner to sleep in. A woman sweeping her front steps saw him first. She nodded politely. Roy nodded back. Then she noticed the rust stains on his hands and the torn knee of his trousers from the climb, and her expression changed just slightly. Not alarm, not yet. Just a small shift, the way a person looks when something does not quite add up. Roy kept walking toward the center of the village. A man near the well looked up. Then a boy stacking wood by a fence stopped and stared. By the time Roy reached the dirt square, there were 6 or 7 people watching him with that same quiet, uncertain look. An older man came out of the largest house on the square. He was not tall, but he carried himself like someone who had spent many years being listened to. His hair was gray and his face was weathered deep. He wore a plain coat and plain boots, and he looked at Roy the way a man looks at something he cannot yet name but already does not like the feel of. His name was Dale. Roy had not known that yet, but he would shortly. Dale walked up to him and stopped a few feet away. He looked Roy over once, top to bottom, and then he spoke. "You came down from the North Trail," Dale said. It was not a question. "I did," Roy said. "You look like you went off the trail." "I went down into the ravine for a bit," Roy said. "There were some young drakes caught in old mining chains down there. I cut them loose." The square went very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes when nothing is happening. The kind that comes when something has already happened and everyone knows it except the person who caused it. Dale's face did not move for a long moment. The woman who had been sweeping her step had come closer without Roy noticing, and now she stood with her broom held still, her eyes wide. The boy who had been stacking wood took 2 slow steps backward. Dale breathed in through his nose. He looked at Roy for another long moment. Then he turned his head and spoke to a young man standing near the stable door. "Go get Lena," Dale said quietly. "Tell her to bring the lamp." The young man went immediately without a word. Dale looked back at Roy. "Come inside," he said. "Now." Roy followed him into the large house. It was simple inside, a long table, a fire going low in the hearth, shelves of jars and folded cloth along one wall. Dale pulled out a chair at the table and sat down. He gestured for Roy to sit across from him. Roy sat. Dale folded his hands on the table and looked at Roy with tired, serious eyes. "Tell me exactly what you did," Dale said. "Every part of it." So Roy told him. The sound from the ravine, the climb down, the 3 young drakes in the mining chains, the tools, the rust, the time it took. He told it plainly, the way he told everything, no extra color, no drama. Just what happened. Dale listened without interrupting. When Roy finished, Dale was quiet for a while. Then an older woman came in through the side door carrying a small oil lamp, even though the room was not dark yet. This was Lena. She was older than Dale, her white hair pulled back tight, her eyes sharp and quick. She sat down at the end of the table and looked at Roy and then at Dale. "He freed 3 young drakes in the North Ravine," Dale told her. "Alone. Used his tools on the chains." Lena set the lamp down on the table very carefully. She looked at Roy for a long time. "Do you know whose territory that ravine is in?" she asked. "I did not know it belonged to anyone," Roy said honestly. "It belongs to the elder drakes," Lena said. 3 of them. They have held this mountain and everything on it for longer than this village has existed. Those young drakes you freed, they are not wild strays. They are young ones of the elder clan." She paused. "Touching them without elder permission is the gravest offense a person can commit in this territory. It does not matter the reason. It does not matter that you helped. The elders decide what happens to their young. No one else." Roy was quiet for a moment. "I did not know that," he said. "That changes nothing," Dale said not unkindly. "The elders will know by now. They always know. They will come before sunrise." He leaned forward slightly. "You need to leave. Tonight. Take the south road and do not stop until you are past the second river crossing. If you move fast you may be far enough away before they come." Roy looked at the table. He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about a difficult repair, turning it over, checking each side. Then he looked up at Dale and said, "I think I will stay." Dale stared at him. Lena stared at him. Outside, the last light of the sun disappeared behind the peaks, and the mountain went dark. The village went to bed that night the way people go to bed before a storm. Doors were bolted. Shutters were pulled closed and latched from the inside. The dog that had barked when Roy arrived was brought indoors and did not bark again. Fires were let to burn low so that no light would show through the cracks in the wood. Children were told to be quiet and they listened, because children always understand fear even when no one explains it to them. Dale had given Roy a small room at the back of his house. A cot, a blanket, a candle. Roy sat on the edge of the cot for a while with his pack between his feet and his hands resting on his knees. He was not frightened exactly. He was the kind of man who had spent enough years working with heavy and dangerous things that fear had become something quiet in him, something that sat in the back of his chest and waited without screaming. Lena had come to the door of the room before she went to her own house. She stood in the doorway and looked at him for a moment. "You could still go," she said. "I know," Roy said. She studied him with those quick, sharp eyes. "Why won't you?" Roy thought about it. "Running feels wrong," he said simply. "I did not do anything wrong down in that ravine. I am not going to act like I did." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I hope that matters to them." She left without saying anything else. Roy lay down on the cot and closed his eyes. He did not sleep deeply. He rested the way he rested on difficult nights, close to the surface, aware of sound and shift and change. The village was very still. The mountain outside was very still. The kind of still that is not peaceful but waiting. He heard it just before midnight. It started as a feeling more than a sound. A low vibration moving through the earth, through the floor, through the legs of the cot and up into his bones. Then it became sound, a deep and rhythmic impact, steady and heavy, like boulders being set down one after another on the mountain slope. Then it became something he could feel in his teeth. Roy sat up. He heard a shutter crack open somewhere in the village and then snap shut again immediately. He heard a child's voice quickly hushed. He heard nothing else from the villagers after that. Just silence and bolted doors and people holding their breath behind solid walls. Roy stood up. He put on his coat. He picked up his pack out of habit then set it back down. He would not need his tools for this. He walked to the front of Dale's house and lifted the bolt on the door. Dale appeared from the back hallway, candle in hand, eyes wide. "Do not go out there," Dale said in a low, tight voice. "It will be fine," Roy said. "You do not know that." "No," Roy agreed. "I do not." He opened the door and walked out. The village square was empty and silver gray under a half moon. Every door was shut. Every shutter was closed. Not a single light showed anywhere. The square looked like a place that had been abandoned, like no one had ever lived there at all. Roy walked to the center of the square and stopped. He heard them before he saw them. The ground impacts were slower now, more deliberate, as if the things making them knew exactly where they were going and were in no hurry. Then the first shape came over the ridge above the northern end of the village, and Roy understood for the first time in his life how small a man really was. The elder drake was enormous. Not the way a large animal is enormous. The way a part of the landscape is enormous. Its body was long and heavy, covered in scales so dark they were almost black, each one the size of a roof tile. Its wings were folded tight against its back, but even folded they rose above the rooftops on either side of the narrow lane it moved through. Its head was broad and flat, scarred across the left side with old marks that had healed into pale ridges. Its eyes, even in the dim moonlight, gave off a dull copper glow. Behind it came two more. They were slightly smaller but only slightly. They moved with the same slow, deliberate weight, placing each foot with care, their tails sweeping low behind them. When all three were in the square, the ground under Roy's boots was trembling steadily, a constant low shake that did not stop. They stopped 20 feet from Roy. The lead elder lowered its massive head. Roy stood still with his hands open at his sides and his eyes up. He did not look away and he did not step back. His heart was hitting hard in his chest, but his feet were flat on the ground and his hands were steady. The elder's head came down slowly, leveling out until one great copper eye was directly in front of Roy, close enough that he could see his own reflection in it. The eye moved. It tracked across him slowly, top to bottom, side to side, the way Roy himself tracked across a broken machine when he was trying to understand what had gone wrong and what could be saved. It was studying him. The other two elders were still behind it, watching, completely silent. The whole village was silent. The mountain was silent. Roy breathed slowly and let the elder look at him for as long as it needed to. He did not speak. He did not move. He just stood in the silver light of the half moon in the middle of the empty square, hands open, and waited. The elder did not move for a long time. It simply held its great head level with Roy and looked at him with that slow, copper-bright eye. Roy did not shift his feet. He did not look away. He had learned long ago, in years of working with large and unpredictable things, that patience was not just a virtue. It was a tool. Sometimes the most important one in the pack. Then the elder moved. Not its head. Not its wings. It moved its left foreleg. It brought it forward slowly, the massive clawed foot settling on the ground between them with a weight that sent a small shudder through the earth. Roy looked down at it. And then he saw the wound. It ran along the upper part of the foreleg, just above where the leg thickened into the shoulder. It was deep and it was old and it was very bad. The scales around it had lifted and darkened, and the skin beneath was swollen and tight, the color of something that had been wrong for a long time and had never been properly addressed. In the creases of the wound Roy could see the marks clearly, the same kind of marks he had seen on the young drakes in the ravine that afternoon. Straight lines pressed deep into flesh. Chain marks. Old iron mining chain marks. Roy understood immediately. The elder had been caught too. Not today, not recently. A long time ago, maybe years ago, the chain had been removed or broken free, but the wound it left behind had never healed cleanly. It had festered slowly under those dark scales, deep enough to cause pain with every step, old enough that the elder had likely stopped expecting it to ever feel different. Roy crouched down slowly. He looked at the wound carefully, the way he looked at any problem, without rushing, without flinching, just reading it for what it was. The swelling told him there was infection deep in the tissue. The dark color at the edges told him it had been there a long time. The way the elder held the leg, not quite flat on the ground, told him it hurt more than the creature was letting on. Roy unslung his pack and set it on the ground beside him. He opened it slowly, making no sudden movements, keeping his hands visible at all times. He was aware of the two other elders behind the lead one, aware of their eyes on his back, aware of the absolute stillness of the village around him. He pushed all of that to the edge of his mind and focused on what was in front of him. He had a small leather roll of medical supplies in the bottom of his pack. He carried it because his work often left him cut or bruised far from any help, and he had learned to be his own solution. He unrolled it on the ground beside him. Clean cloth strips. A small tin of drawing salve, the kind that pulled infection out of deep wounds. A bottle of clear spirits for cleaning. A needle and thread for the worst cases. A second tin of sealing wax mixed with herb oil that an old village healer had taught him to make 3 years ago. He looked up at the elder's eye. Still watching him. Still copper bright and steady. Roy picked up the cloth and the bottle of spirits and began. He cleaned the wound first. He poured the spirits over a folded cloth and pressed it gently against the infected area. The elder's leg tensed. The enormous body above Roy went rigid for one long moment, and Roy heard the other 2 elders shift their weight behind him. He did not stop. He kept the pressure gentle and steady and continued cleaning, working from the outer edges inward the way he had been taught, lifting away the dark residue of years of slow damage. The elder did not pull back. Roy moved to the drawing salve next. He worked it into the wound with 2 fingers, pressing carefully into the deepest parts of the injury without rushing. The salve was thick and dark and it smelled strongly of pine and iron. It would pull the infection toward the surface over the next day, draw out what the body had been trying to fight on its own for too long. Roy used almost the entire tin. The wound was deep enough to need it. Then he took the clean cloth strips and began to bandage the leg. He wrapped firmly but not tightly, the way a good bandage needed to be, enough pressure to support the tissue, not enough to cut into it. He tied each layer off cleanly and moved to the next. His hands worked the way they always worked, steady and sure and without hesitation, because hesitation never fixed anything. When the last strip was tied off, Roy sat back on his heels and looked at his work. It was clean. It was proper. It was the best he could do with what he had, and what he had was enough. He looked up. The elder was still looking at him. But something in that copper eye had changed. Roy could not have named exactly what it was. It was not softer. It was not warmer. It was something quieter than either of those things. Something that had been carrying a weight for a very long time and had just, very slightly, set part of it down. Then the elder opened its mouth. The sound that came out was low. So low Roy felt it more in his ribs than he heard it with his ears. It was long and it was steady and it rolled out across the empty square and up the mountain slopes and into the dark sky above like something being released after years of being held. The 2 elders behind answered it. Their voices joined the first, lower still, and the ground hummed beneath Roy's boots. A shutter cracked open on the side of Dale's house. Dale's face appeared in the gap, pale as ash in the moonlight. His eyes went from the elder to Roy and back again. His mouth moved but no sound came out. Then, barely loud enough to hear, he said the words to no one in particular, perhaps to Lena somewhere behind him, perhaps to himself. "That sound?" Dale whispered. "No human has ever heard that sound and lived to speak of it." The sound faded slowly into the mountain dark. Roy stayed where he was, crouched on the ground beside his open pack, hands resting on his knees. The three elders were still. The village was still. The only movement in the whole world, as far as Roy could tell, was the slow rise and fall of the lead elder's massive chest as it breathed. Roy began to pack his supplies away. He folded the cloth strips that were left, capped the bottle of spirits, rolled the leather medical pouch closed and tied it. He worked quietly and without hurry, the same way he had worked on the wound, the same way he worked on everything. When his pack was closed, he stood up and put it on his back and looked at the elder. The elder looked back at him. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Roy nodded once, the way he nodded at the end of a job. Respectful. Plain. No extra weight to it. He walked back to Dale's house and went inside and lay down on the cot and closed his eyes. He did not know how much time passed. He was tired in the deep way that comes after a long day and a longer night, and for a while there was nothing but darkness and the faint hum of the mountain outside. He did not dream. What woke him was light. Not sound. Just light, pressing thin and pale through the gap under the door of the small room. The particular gray-gold light of the world just before the sun clears the peaks. Roy lay still for a moment, aware of it, aware of the silence of the village, aware that the trembling in the ground that had been present all night had stopped. He got up, put on his coat, picked up his pack. He opened the door. Dale was standing in the main room, fully dressed, candle burned down to nothing in his hand. Lena was beside him. Two other villagers Roy did not know by name stood near the far wall. They were all looking at the front door with the expression of people who very much wanted to know what was on the other side of it and very much did not want to open it themselves. Roy crossed the room and opened the front door. The square was full of light. The sun was just coming over the eastern ridge, throwing long gold lines across the dirt and the rooftops and the stone of the mountain above. The air was cold and clean and completely still. The three elder drakes were in the square. They had not left. They were standing where Roy had last seen them, in the same positions, the lead elder at the front and the other two behind. But something was different now. They were not still in the watchful, waiting way they had been still all night. They were still in a different way. A gathered way. Like something was about to happen. Roy walked out into the square and stopped. The lead elder looked at him across the open ground. That copper eye, steady and deep. Then, slowly, the elder lowered its head. Not the way it had lowered its head the night before to study him. Lower than that. Much lower. The great scarred head came down until the elder's chin touched the earth, and it stayed there. The two elders behind it did the same. Three massive heads on the ground before Roy. Roy stood very still. He had repaired broken machines, freed trapped animals, treated wounds in dark ravines and cold mountain squares. He had never in his life been looked at the way these three creatures were looking at him now, even with their heads to the ground. There was a weight to it that had nothing to do with their size. He heard movement from the treeline at the northern edge of the square. Three small shapes came out of the shadows between the pine trees. They moved slowly in a wide circle, their dark scales catching the early morning light. The three young drakes from the ravine. They circled Roy once, close enough that he could have reached out and touched the nearest one, and as they moved they made a soft, low sound, all three together, barely above a whisper. Then they stopped and stood at the edge of the circle they had made, watching him. Roy heard boots behind him. He did not turn. Dale had come out of the house. Then Lena. Then the others, one by one, stepping into the square with wide eyes and careful feet, spreading out in a loose group behind Roy. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved quickly. They just stood and watched. The lead elder raised its head from the ground. It rose back to its full height, slow and steady, and looked at Roy for a long moment. Then it reached out with one foreleg, the bandaged one, and Roy saw the effort it cost the elder to extend it fully, the slight tightening around the eye, the careful way it placed the foot. It brought the foreleg toward Roy's pack. Roy did not step back. He turned slightly so the pack was accessible and held still. The elder extended one long claw and pressed it against the leather of Roy's workshop bag. Not hard. Not with force. With the same deliberate care Roy had used with his own hands the night before. The claw moved in a single slow motion, a short curved line with a small mark crossing it, pressed clean into the leather. Then the elder pulled back. Roy looked down at the mark on his bag. Small and precise and permanent. Dale stepped up beside him. The old man stared at the mark for a long moment, and Roy watched the color drain from his face and then come back again, different this time, softer. I have only ever seen that in old drawings, Dale said quietly. I did not think it was real. He paused. That is the Drake Friend sign. It is the highest thing an elder Drake can give to any living person. He looked at Roy. I have never heard of it being given to a human. Roy looked at the mark on his bag. Lena stepped up on his other side. Her sharp eyes were bright. Every Drake in every territory will know that mark, she said. Every road. Every pass. Every high trail and low valley. The lead elder held Roy's gaze for one final moment. Then it turned slowly and walked back toward the northern ridge. The other two followed. The young Drake slipped back into the treeline without a sound. In less than a minute the square was empty again. Roy stood in the morning light with Dale on one side and Lena on the other and the whole village gathering quietly around him. He looked down at the small carved mark on his old workshop bag. Then he put the bag on his back the same as always and looked at the road ahead. Every road was open to him now. Every mountain pass, every high trail, every dark ravine and narrow path through Drake territory from that morning forward was safe ground. Roy adjusted the strap on his pack and walked on.